Hi, this is Cara Pike-Inman, and this is my summary and reflection upon the Module 2 readings. So we're going to try to highlight 350 pages of reading in 5 minutes-ish, so here goes. I'm going to start off with Ren and Reason. Looking at Chapter 4 of Ren and Reason, it brought forth a lot of really familiar themes for me. Things about first-year experience, and I've taught a freshman seminar for about the past 6 years, and I'm currently teaching one. Some things about living learning communities. I used to manage a living learning community at my former position in southern Indiana, as well as transition, which is a topic that's of a lot of interest to me and something that I actually want to look at potentially for my dissertation. So really looking at transition, since that's something that jumped out at me, I really liked the discussion about kind of how students have a loss of support networks when they go to college. That's something that I want to look at further, is how students lose that support network when they come to college, and then how they kind of re-lose it again when they go abroad, because it may become even more accessible. And that need to reestablish a support network in their new culture, whether that's on campus here in the States or when they study abroad. On that same line, the discussion about kind of how students assimilate or integrate and the level to which they integrate into their new culture was also very interesting to me. I find it very personally interesting looking at students in my freshman seminar class who maybe go home every single weekend and who spend their weekday evenings watching Netflix or communicating with people from back home via social media, and how they integrate into campus culture in comparison with a student who stays on campus, joins clubs and organizations, and really interacts with people and faculty and staff on campus, and how they had such a different experience. And then applying that abroad, the difference between a student who maybe goes to Spain and lives in an apartment with other Americans and is cooking American food and speaking English, and how their experience is so different from a student who maybe lives with a host family and is eating local food and is speaking Spanish and is hanging out with locals, and what drastically different experiences those two students have in terms of their integration and their assimilation into the host culture. And then also the concept discussed on page 65 about how integration into a new culture sometimes equates to a loss of identity in regard to your home culture. This is, again, something we see a lot in education abroad, where students actually maybe have more reverse culture shock when they come home because they have become so much a part of their new culture. And that's probably the biggest thing when I talk to study abroad returnees, where they say, I didn't realize how much I had maybe become critical of things of the U.S., or I'd started seeing things from a new perspective. And it was really hard for me to come home because I had become such a part of my new culture. So those were some of the concepts that I found particularly interesting. In Chapter 5, this discusses college environments. There was a lot in there that I really enjoyed, particularly kind of the discussion of how we can bring diversity into the campus environment. And as somebody who works to kind of foster dialogue between people of different cultures, who teaches courses in intercultural communication and global citizenship, I really enjoyed that part of Chapter 5. And I really liked the discussion about kind of the relationship between students and the campus environment, how the environment affects the students and how students affect the environment. Again, this is something in international education that we talk about a lot, particularly maybe looking at a small community in a non-traditional location, and how an influx of a couple hundred American students in that location really changes the environment and changes the culture. And on the flip side, looking at how bringing international students into campuses here in the United States, how they bring such unique and diverse perspectives into the classroom, and how their presence on campus also affects the environment. So looking at kind of both of those sides. Something else about Chapter 5 that really stood out to me was the discussion of the guy land hypothesis. I had heard discussions about this concept, about how male students feel like maybe when they're around other male students, or female students when they're around male students, feel like there's this kind of heterosexualized norm that they have to follow, and that they can't express themselves authentically. I've led my own faculty-led program, or co-led, since 2007. The first several years were all co-ed, and the last 2 years, not by choice, just the way it worked out, have been fully female programs. And particularly this last year, we were in Belize, and it was so interesting to me I was able to observe that everything that was thrown at the students, they jumped up, they tried, they didn't care how silly they might have looked. For example, we learned a Mayan dance, and every student immediately jumped up and tried to do this dance. When I've been in other locations, there have been similar opportunities to learn an Irish dance or a Spanish dance. I think that the co-ed nature of the group restricted some students from feeling free to express themselves and to be authentic and to do what they wanted to do. So I found that whole concept to be very intriguing. Looking at chapter 6, Brofenbrenner's ecology model kind of brought together a lot of the readings we've done in former classes, looking at kind of both the micro and mesosystem levels of who students room with and kind of those localized factors that affect their development as a student, their experience as a student, as well as some of those macro and exosystem things like policies and trends and social forces that affect students' experience and development. But one of the things about chapter 6 that I really appreciated was the discussion about the need to balance support with challenge. I think that so often we get so hung up with supporting the students, which is integral, but sometimes I think we support to the point that we take away the challenge, and I think that that's a detriment to the students, particularly if we flip readings to the pages in Pasquarello and Teranzini's, especially for them to be able to develop those cognitive skills, have the intellectual growth, the diverse experiences that they should be able to have. So I think that's such an important thing to keep in mind, is balancing the challenge with the support. The readings in Pasquarello and Teranzini, basically the entire time I was like, yes, yes, yes. This is why I'm such an advocate for education abroad and international education in general, that I feel like, and this is if you read the first couple pages of my lit review, this is what it says. It says that when students study abroad, they learn more about themselves. They get to have diverse experiences. They engage in reflective thinking. They gain problem-solving skills. They gain critical thinking skills. They're able to see and argue both sides of an issue. So that's a lot of why I'm such an advocate of study abroad, is basically everything that was in these chapters about their attitudes, their values, the beliefs, the development of those types of things. So really, everything in those readings I felt was like kind of a personal self-affirmation to some extent. Chapter 3 to a lesser extent, but particularly chapters 4, 5, and 6. And how students are able to gain a lot of those critical thinking skills without access to the support networks that they typically rely on. If they need to problem solve something, they can't call mom and dad necessarily, and they have to problem solve. So how it really necessitates the development of those skills. And some of the other things that were talked about relationships with faculty and relationships with peers, and some of those, the focus on reflective thinking and how some of those things are really incorporated even into things like faculty-led programs, which are the biggest growing component of education abroad. So there's slightly over 5 minutes, but I look forward to hearing all of your thoughts, and I hope you all had a great weekend.